Failure to confront gender-based violence spring from the same root. A closed system that resists transparency until tragedy forces its hand. If we accept this division of EIS, we reward that culture and tell the next Mr. Johnson and the next native bird nesting in a blast zone that their safety is negotiable. So I'm urging the board to reject the FEIS and demand real accountability for the lands and for the people who call them home. Mahalo.
Thank you very much, Representative Caruso. Could I just ask for clarification? The two meetings that you mentioned, where there were 3 hours of testimony or 3 hours of comment, were those your meetings or were those meetings sponsored by the Army?
Those were meetings sponsored by our office in partnership with Colonel Misigoi.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much. All right. The next person I'll have is Bianca Isaki.
Good afternoon, Chair and Commissioner and board members. Bianca Isaki here in my individual capacity, supporting the staff recommendations. And I just two things. So one of the purposes of having these environmental documents is to reduce, is to have information for you to make a decision, and without, and this is a quote, without undue cross-reference to other documents. And one problem we had with this procedurally, was that for their alternatives analysis and multiple other substantive portions of the EIS, they refer to, say, their analysis of alternatives or other documents that were not only not appended to it, but were not public. And so, for instance, if we're going to comment on what is a reasonable alternative or proposed alternatives, which you're supposed to do as part of the process as a member of the public, how can you do that if the EIS and the Army refers to a document where they've already analyzed the alternatives and then tells you you can't see the document unless you go through FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act. The other thing, just briefly, people have talked about the cleanup issue. And I just want to, one of the ways that they say that they'll clean up is comply with CERCLA and the lease. The lease says that they will remove weapons and shells in connection with training activities to the extent that a technical and economic capability exists, and that removal will not exceed fair market value. And I'll just point out that at your April 11th, 2025 meeting, the board expressed concern about the lack of reporting for remediation efforts for former military lands on Oahu and Hawaii under expanded CERCLA requirements, and specifically the Waikoloa training area, which is it's cost $217 million, something like that, and the projected cost is $720 million. Oh, sorry, I see my time's up, but thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bianca. Capano Carvalho, excuse me. Capano. Can you unmute yourself? I know, Angela. There's no eating in here. Oh. No signs.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. Hello, my name is Kifano. I'm representing on behalf of myself as an individual, but I would like to speak from my experience as a conservation professional who's worked in this field for just over 10 years. I made 10 years at the beginning of this month. And I wanted to speak on my personal experiences from working in areas like Poamoho, like Kahuku training area, like Mākua area. The military are not good stewards of the land. We were constantly required to report on findings of whatever we found, especially in the Kahuku training area. We would routinely find extremely large trash piles of MREs, all that kind of stuff. I also have found UXOs multiple times. I have found them in areas that are not training areas, like off the side of the Like. I found 9 active bazooka rounds from the Vietnam era that were just dumped on the side of the road. We can no longer work over there because of that. And the last thing I wanted to mention is that the EIS, as I understand it and the way I read it, is factually untrue because there are things that are not reported on there. I put in my written testimony that on page 3, section 3, page 135, paragraph 2, I believe it is, it says, in KTA, there are no known burials of Iune in the area. that is factually untrue because I have found 4 of them myself, and I've reported them to KTA, to Laura Gilda, who is DPW Cultural. They're aware that they're there. Shifty is aware that they're there too, and they were, DPW Cultural was supposed to notify Shifty of their existence, and they have not. But I have also found other things that were supposed to be brought to Shifty's attention, which I did. So what I'd like to leave you with is that if they're willing to lie about known burials, I held the bones myself. I put them back in the cave, and I closed the burial cave. If they're willing to lie about that, what else are they lying about in the final EIS? Mahalo to you guys, and mahalo for everything you do.
Thank you very much, Kipano. I have Colonel Mark Brown.
Yes, mahalo. My name is Mark Brown. I retired as a colonel in the U.S. Army following 30 years of active duty service. So I understand how important having the appropriate training grounds is to the Army. Since the 25th Infantry Division on Oahu is the Army's only division that specializes in jungle training, the 450 acres of training space in Kahuku that the Army is requesting continued access to is critical to the division's mission. I've also been a Hawaii resident for 28 years, so I understand how important historic ancestral lands such as the Mākua Valley are to the people of Hawaii. As explained in Section 2-5 of the FEIS, the Army is prepared to return about 93% of the currently leased land to the state and is only asking to retain the 450 acre Tract A1 in Kahuku. This return of over 5,800 acres of land currently leased from the state by the Army clearly demonstrates the Army's good faith and willingness to make considerable concessions for the public good. I urge approval of the FEIS, not only in recognition of this good faith, but because it would be an important step towards a follow-on agreement for the Army to transfer about 450 acres of the Makai portion of the 3,408 acres of federal land they manage in the Mākua Valley to the state in exchange for ownership of the 450 acres of jungle training space in Kahuku. The Army expresses their willingness to consider such an exchange on pages 4-1 and ES-14 of the FEIS. If an exchange took place, the opportunities for residents and appreciation of the cultural significance of the valley are endless. The state could, for example, designate Mākua Valley Makai as a state park to be enjoyed by all Hawaii residents, especially those on the leeward side of Oahu. Mahalo nui loa for your time and attention.
Thank you very much, Colonel Brown. Next I have is Luann Langford.
Aloha.
Aloha.
I, Luann Langford Favorito, member of the Makaha Hawaiian Civic Club, and we do oppose. I did submit testimony, and I will stand on that. Wanted to give some clarification for Auntie Rocky Kaluhipa, who reported the Association of Hawaiian Civic Clubs, and one of your board members asked the membership. I also sit on the executive committee with Driana Pilili. There are 3,266 members of the Association of Hawaiian Civic Club, and I believe you have our testimony. Mahalo, it's been a long day, everybody. Aloha.
Aloha. Thank you so much, Luann. Now I will take Tara Rojas. Tara Rojas?
Aloha. Aloha, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Aloha mai kako o tātara brokas ko inoa. One of the people to you, and I stand in lawful solidarity with the Kanakoiwi and the Aina. I strongly support the staff recommendation to reject the Army's FEIS. Let's be clear, Puamau Keo Kaine Kopono is not symbolic. It is a legal and spiritual mandate. The life of the land is perpetuated in righteousness, not desecration. The BLNR's fiduciary duties are set forth in Article 11, Section 1 of the so-called Hawaii State Constitution. Duties that require the conservation and protection of natural resources for the benefit of the people. But buried within that same article is a contradiction, a loophole. To promote development and utilization of resources, in furtherance of the self-sufficiency of the state, end quote. What state? The Hawaiian Kingdom still exists under international law. The United States admits its role in the illegal overthrow through the 1993 Apology Resolution. You cannot build fiduciary duties atop stolen land. That is not law, that is fraud. Again, you cannot build fiduciary duties atop stolen land. That is not law, that is fraud. Maxims of law are clear. Nemo dat quod non habet. One cannot give what one does not have. The U.S. cannot lease what it unlawfully took. Fraus et killare fraudem. It is a fraud to conceal a fraud. A delegated power cannot be again delegated. You are trustees, not landlords, for military occupation. The Army has failed its obligations, unexploded ordinate, desecration of sacred sites, contamination of Aina Hawaii. This FEIS does not mitigate harm, it justifies it. To approve it would be a direct violation of your duty as fiduciaries. Let it be remembered, the life of the land is perpetuated in righteousness. If you honor that, you must reject the Army's FEIS and deny any lease renewal for the U.S. Army's occupation of lands on Oahu. These lands must be restored to the people and returned to the right relationship with the Army.
Your time.
Yeah, I just did my last line. I want this on record that the Army, this is not your land, and the BLNR and Chair Chang, we do not feel safe. So have Go Care assist them out of the parking lot and forever out of Hawaii. Mahalo.
Dave Mulinex. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Dave, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, hi. Dave Mulinex, representing Greenpeace Hawaii, 3,000 members statewide, members and supporters. We strongly oppose renewal of this lease, and we ask you to reject the EIS. We already know that the U.S. military is not working in our best interest. They say that it's all about national security. But their idea of national security is to protect their assets first. We know that it's dramatically shown by Red Hill. The military knew full well that the tanks were leaking and the people were being poisoned, yet they covered it up. Then once it was discovered, they downplayed it, pretended it wasn't that big a deal. Finally, they blatantly lied, knowing full well we were being poisoned. This is not, a small incident. It's not a one-time deal. This is the MO of the military. They are more concerned about protecting their assets than they are protecting the health and safety of the people of Hawaii. And that really is the national security they should be focused on. They have their generals and their admirals. They're all there just for a couple of years to protect the thing that they're supposed to be protecting. They have no concern for our health and safety. So that leaves it to us. We know the military is not going to protect us. They are not going to stand up for us. That is not their job. That is your job. And just like with Red Hill, our congressional delegation knew full well that those tanks were going to leak. The mayor knew, the governor knew, they did nothing. They sat back and allowed that to happen because they were intimidated by the military and by national security. So now this is your Red Hill. This is your opportunity to stand up and do the right thing. And just what all of us are doing here is asking just to do your job. And we really appreciate that you'll do that. And we know that you, like us, live here. And that this is your land, your Aina, and all of us together are pretending it as one. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dave. I have Ohana Unity Party.
Aloha, I think Don Chang, can you hear me?
Pikachu!
Yes, I'm the chairman for the Ohana Unity Party. So since you guys 2 testimonials, I know last time, we're doing better on this time because we stayed till later. But good job so far to all the community. My first testimony, because I ran it through, we talked to the Kona Council, and a lot of people worked hard on this EIS to put together the feelings to give back the lands. You have to be diplomatic about it and put reservations in my first initial testimony. But if you look at my second testimony, I heard what everyone said, I'm actually opposing it as well. Because what's crazy about this, if you guys say no, right, and you're going to Gestapo the Army, make them work hard, make them pay the karma, and if the lease is expired in 4 years and you do nothing, then you get all the lease back, right? So you guys don't have to do all the work. You guys can negotiate, stall the tactic, just say no. You already heard the feelings of how they treat the military. You can't trust them. That's the Army. Because you joined the Air Force, I wear the Air Force ring, because I don't follow the Army Field Manual 27-10. That would be the Army, not for the Air Force. They're using those weapons to train other soldiers to go kill what we had to do. Kansai got sent to overthrow Iraq and Saddam Hussein with Netanyahu and IPAC. I have to address the issue because they sent me to war too. In 2000, I'm 25 years as a war veteran. You hear the veterans talk. I don't want them to train other people to go train in Hawaii to go kill people in Pakistan, Iran, Taiwan, China, or none of that. They shouldn't use Hawaii as an excuse to go train people to go kill, bomb, Kaholavi, Ni Hao, or some other kukai, because I haven't seen $1 a year for this lease. I got quarters with me, so I'm about to double. Whatever the Army's paying you, I will double this lease. I got 8 quarters, that's $2. I will triple that lease with more quarters. I will give you guys 300% of whatever you need for that lease, because this doesn't make any sense. I haven't seen a single dollar for them to give to you guys or give to me, but I'm ready to triple it. Shelby and Billy want to give me 500% more in quarters I can pay right up front, unlike them who lie and BS and full of kukai. So thank you very much. I know I think Don Chen, you'll make the right decision following your heart. Chiku, see you guys, love you all, see you in cyberspace. Aloha!
Thank you very much, Pikachu. Philip Kapu?
Can you folks hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I'm Philip Kapu from Honolulu. I'm just an individual giving my testimony. Hoping that you folks will oppose the FEIS. I'll talk about something a little bit more personal. Relating to KTA, I've worked there for years in conservation. I know almost everything from Paipaihalua to Kaunala Gulch, working in those areas. Specifically, I wanted to talk about in the volume 1 of the FEIS on page 3-135, under summary of information obtained from interviewees, it talks about, it says, according to archaeological data obtained from the Army, there are no recorded burials located on state-owned land at KTA. Kind of reiterating what Kipano said earlier, I was with him. We found multiple burials that are on state-owned land and off the state-owned land, and have reported it to DPW Cultural with Laura Gilda. We've seen the burials that they found, which is up, I'm pretty sure, in the state land. Burials we found all over on and off state land in those areas. Whether or not they fall within whatever lands are in this section of the EIS, what goes on above it, the simulated battles that go on above with the giant trucks and the grenades blowing up and the sounds of guns and all of that chaos disturbs these burials and disturbs our iwi kupuna. And I've seen them myself there. So that little fact alone should be enough to reject this EIS, being that our iwi kupuna are being disturbed at this level. Mahalo.
Thank you very much, Philip. Omar?
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Aloha to all members of the board. My name is Omar Moran, and I'm speaking to you today to urge that you reject the Army's title.
Excuse me, Omar, you have to turn off your YouTube because there's an echo. And then unmute yourself. Unmute yourself. There you go. Go ahead.
Is it better now?
Yeah.
Okay. I am speaking to you to urge you to reject the Army's final environment impact statement for the continued military use of lands at Kahuku, Kawailoa-Poamoho, and Mākua. The FEIS is incomplete and misleading. It ignores major concerns, minimizes real harms, and fails to meet the standards required under Hawaii law and their duty to protect the public trust lands. The FEIS lacks updated cultural site surveys, ignores iwi kupuna, and offers no clear protocols for cultural access. Community concerns were dismissed, violating cultural rights. Meanwhile, the Army continues training in endangered species habitat without required permits, offering no credible mitigation. cumulative harms, cultural, ecological, and environmental, are ignored. And like Red Hill, the military evaded its responsibility in cleanup. The Army failed to evaluate meaningful, non-military or reduced use alternatives, despite repeated calls from the public, Native Hawaiian communities, and agency reviewers. Instead, the FEIS focuses solely on maintaining military control, ignoring the potential for restorative uses of these lands. The FEIS is not a genuine, it's a justification for continued occupation and degradation of Hawaiian lands. Accepting it would set a dangerous precedent, signaling that environmental law, cultural protections, and public input mean nothing. I urge you to vote no and reject this FEIS for its failure to address contamination, cultural and ecological harm, and for violating the public trust. Mahalo, and thank you for your time upholding the kuleana to protect our land.
Thank you very much, Amar. Kristen Young.
Hi, thank you for accepting Zoom testimony. My name is Kristen Young. I was born, raised, and reside on Oahu. I'm not Hawaiian, but I support Kanaka Maui's right to their land that has been illegally occupied for over a century. I am a member of Faith Action for Community Equity and of the United Church of Christ, and I also speak for my identity as a person of faith when I urge you to reject the Army's final environmental impact statement. Ditto to many who went before me, and I stand on my written testimony. I do not believe that any written environmental impact statement from the military could ever be sufficient to ethically permit the use of sacred spaces for war training. If the U.S. truly cared about national security, money wouldn't blow the military budget for war and weapons, but rather go toward caring for the many people who are hungry and unsheltered within its borders. National security is often the nice way of saying imperialism, so please don't feel that you're not supporting national security by not immediately giving the military what they want, especially when they don't do their part. The fact that Hawaii is strategically positioned for the military cannot be of greater importance than the fact that we live on small islands with intricate ecosystems in the middle of the ocean. What's good for national security is not necessarily good for Hawaii security. We've already seen the harm of military occupation on the environment, people, and social fabric over the last 60+. Prior to giving testimony today, we were reminded that we're just looking at this EIS before us, not what's happened at Red Hill and elsewhere. But I ask you to see the bigger picture, to consider what the military has already stated through their actions. The land, water, people are and have been crying out. What more of a statement do we need? After generations of desecration, we have a real opportunity for healing. While your decision today is technically just about the FEIS, what you decide will determine what comes next. Your decision will impact generations to come and can forge a path toward restoration and write a better chapter following decades of destruction or the opposite. You have been put in these positions for such a time as this, and I ask that you fulfill your kuleana to protect Hawaii and its people.
Thank you very much, Kristen. Kanani? Kanani Atan?
I'm so sorry, I didn't realize that you were taking just anybody, and I emailed my testimony yesterday, so I'm just gonna get my testimony up if that's okay.
If you can summarize it, because we have, if you submitted it, we would have read it.
Okay. All right, so just summarizing, I am born and raised in Wahiawa, and frequented the Poamoho, Kahuku, Mākua areas, and even traveled through the Kolikoli Pass as a child many times on the way to Waianae to see my grandparents. And so I feel like I really know and understand the rhythm of military occupation because I lived right next to Schofield Barracks. I grew up and graduated from Lady High School. And so many of my friends, we were always on base to learn from the military culture. And I even considered, the military lifestyle and things like that, but I'm so glad that I didn't choose that pathway. And so what I'm realizing now at age 56, it is that the military culture is is uncaring to Hawaii's lands and could do a better job with all the expertise and brilliance and technical knowledge and information that is available to the military to become better stewards, to do better, to be better partners to our community, and in particular these places that I have developed deep relationships with. I consider Poamoho part of my family. I consider Kahuku the same, and Mākua. And so I feel like the FEIS is inadequate, and the basic military culture relationship with Hawaii is inadequate, and we need to step up better. So mahalo.
Thank you very much, Kanani. That is the last person on Zoom. Are you here to provide a comment? Do we have, how many more do we have?
Only him so far.
Okay, why don't you come up here? Because after we gave you an opportunity, no,
No, go ahead.
Please come on up. And then I'm going to close public comment.
Okay. I'll go make a final.
Yeah, make a final call.
Aloha kako, ohale moai ke ia. I feel like we were just here a few weeks ago discussing Pakuloa FEIS, which you guys all unanimously rejected. And I would hope that you would reject the same FEIS for Mākua and the rest of these on Oahu. As we know, we've mentioned the illegal occupation of Hawaii has been ongoing and belligerent. And I've said this before, I've said it again. It's a culture of erasure, it's a culture of degradation and desecration. And as we all know, the many songs and the many stories of Mākua, and what has happened there over the years has been atrocious. People were evicted from their homes back in the day. There's still, I'm sure, live firings that have been happening like within the last 2 years or since we've last had the rim pack here. I go out to that site often. My grandma had a very special place in Makaha. And during her last days, I spent with her there. And many of those days, we saw the helicopters flying overhead. And my grandma was at a time of her passing, spending time in Makaha, she always, wished for our Aina to be a free and a safe place. And I know that we talk about national defense, national security. We're about in a war with Iran right now, but it only puts a target on our back. Hawaii has had a target on our back for the last 130 years. We were a free and neutral country and nation. And now with having America on our soil, it creates a bigger impact of national security for us here in Hawaii. So I ask that you reject this EIS. I ask that you reject the military yet again. And I implore you, yet again, do not give them a pass on this lease. Do not give them the pass on this EIS. Mahalo.
Thank you very much. Any others?
No, ma'am.
Okay. I am going to close public comments at this time. It is now 1:45. I'm going to call, let's see, our DLNR staff. Rihanna, could you call our DLNR staff back? They're right here. They're right here. And then I'm going to ask the Army to come up to the table. At this time, I'm going to give the land board members an opportunity to ask both staff and the applicant any questions.
You want to sit at the table?
Yeah, please do.
I think you guys are up. No.
Well, you can sit right, you can sit right behind. Yeah, you can sit right behind. So board members, questions for either staff or for the Army?
I have a question for the
Yes.
So a lot of testimony, thank you for being here, a lot of testimony speaks of cleanup. Can you comment on the cleanup that's involved by all of the testimonies that we've heard, many. So would you mind speaking to that?
Sure. So per the terms of the lease, the Army is required to comply with certain lease compliance actions, and that includes everything from removing fences, signs, buildings, but then there's also the cleanup of the, specifically the Mākua, munitions and explosives of concern, and any potential contamination, though none has been noted at this point in terms of like groundwater samples, and I can speak to that if you so wish. But the Army has conducted preliminary investigations for the state-owned land for the cleanup. This is on top of an environmental condition of property which has been submitted to your Department of Health. The initial site investigation will guide a plan going forward, which will have to be worked in negotiation with the state.
Thank you. And Chair, the only reason I ask is, I think our community is looking for some kind of defined way in which you can complete the cleanup, and so I have a concern as to what's going to get done and how and when and all that. So it's just a lot of testimony regarding cleanup.
No, I understand that. I would like to reassure you and the community that the Army is committed to doing what is proper in terms of the cleanup of the state-owned land in particular. And again, this is why it's over 9 months ago we started looking at what that might entail so that we could begin working on a schedule and cost estimates that we could then bring to the board.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for the question. Is there any other board member have a question?
I have a few questions.
Yes, please go ahead.
I was going to say, Your Honor.
We're going to all be your honors here.
No. Just wanted to say thank you guys for being here. I know there's been a lot of emotion in the room today and some energy earlier that was intense and heard. I did not know previously that there had been some issues after our last meeting, so I just want to say that, you know, from my perspective, that's unacceptable, and you know, apologize that that was your experience. I wanted to ask if you could, I think one of the things that we've heard frequently from the community is this question of security, and obviously we're living in times that I think feel very scary and, you know, unprecedented for a lot of people. You know, I have many family members going back many generations who have served in the military. I hold those who have made the decision to serve in the highest regard. That is something that I personally, I don't think I have the strength to have done, so appreciate and thank you for your service. Just am wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about the security, the unique security benefits of the property that of the land that you are asking to retain, and if you could also address the concerns that have been raised by the community about the lack of safety that people feel with the presence of the military here, and people feeling like that draws actually more attention and potentially lack of security in addition to some of the community challenges that people mentioned, violence against women and girls, etc.
Thank you, and again, and thank you, Chair Chang, and really to the entire board for the support for Ellis and myself, and today as well as during the last hearing. So thank you. It's kind of tough, right, to talk about what does security mean, and how do we, you know, how do we make everyone feel secure, because it is perhaps a very subjective thing that each person has a different definition of. In terms of the value of the KTA parcel in particular, but also really I would say our training on even the federally owned lands here on Hawaii. I think what I'd like to say about it in terms of the uniqueness is there's nowhere else within the United States, nowhere else where we have training areas that allow us to train in a jungle environment such that is provided here on Oahu. And we know that this is of critical importance. The Army has recently reestablished our jungle training school. The Army is in jungle environments as a way of furthering our understanding of how difficult it is to train and survive in this type of an environment. And so really that's the unique nature that Oahu in particular gives us in terms of training for national security, and particularly for the possibility of something that might happen in the Indo-Pacific. In terms of the security that others feel, I can't really speak to the statements of where people feel that our presence makes them feel as if Hawaii has a target on it. We have bases all over the world, and I know that it is a concern. It is a concern everywhere. It is a concern that when I look at the force protection of our installations, not only for our community on the installations, but our community outside the installations, it's one of the things that we at the garrison are charged with and we take very seriously with evaluating to ensure that we are providing the appropriate force protection levels, the appropriate patrols, the appropriate awareness of our surroundings, and sharing with our interagency and local partners, whether it be HPD, whether it be the Joint Terrorism Task Force here in Hawaii. We're very committed to ensuring that we are a working and active part of that. In order to make terms of public safety, I will just say that we do hold the United States Army as a whole is committed to, and that is holding personnel who do not uphold the law, who do not uphold the customs and traditions of the United States military. We will hold them accountable.
Just have.
Yes, no, please go ahead.
Issue of Mākua Valley, I think, at least as I read it in the press, I think many people were pleasantly surprised to see that Army's preferred scenario include essentially the return, or whatever we want to call it, of that land, and some folks talking about that as a good faith effort. I think you've heard from a lot of people today who I think probably are in favor of that, but also feel like that is not enough. We heard some folks, testifying in support of some of the other options that you presented that would see a more complete return, or again, however we want to use that language, of the land. One question I had is whether the contemplated return of that land is contingent on the acceptance of this FEIS.
I can take that.
Yeah.
No. There is a very deliberate process between the draft and the final EIS. After public comments, after our public meetings, after meeting with key community stakeholders, particularly in Waianae. And at that point, we looked at land utilization and made a very informed and deliberate decision about selecting this as a new preferred alternative for Mākua. And rejection of the EIS, while it would be very disappointing, nonetheless, I don't think that, from my perspective, will change anything else.
Okay.
Agreed. Yeah.
Thank you. And then my last question is just about process, and I think we all know this is the first step in a long process, and these are very emotional meetings. I'm sure we'll have many more very emotional meetings before us between now and 2029. Some of us will still be here in this room, some of us won't, maybe some of us will be in different capacities. And so, what I hear from both staff submittal and public testimony is this question of whether the information being presented here is sufficient as sort of the kickoff to this long process. I think that's very clearly the question that we're charged with today. There are a lot of issues that were raised by members of the community: broken trust, sovereignty, land back, lack of safety, stewardship, UXO, Red Hill, missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, disillusionment with the military, a whole range of issues. And I think there was obviously a lot of emotion and a lot of history that brings all of those questions into this room, and at the same time, again, I think our question here before us today is the question that staff laid out in their staff submittal, like, are we essentially meeting the test of the questions as they have laid them out? Do we have the information that we need to continue to begin this process that we know is going to continue for a long time? That is really the question I struggle with as I think about this, and this question of, you know, good enough. So I appreciated the work that you all did to respond to some of the concerns in the staff submittal. Alice, I think you were sort of in the process of addressing some of those when you need to finish addressing some of those briefly, if we can, just acknowledging
Yes.
time and just, I think, so I would be interested in hearing that. And then my last other maybe slightly challenging question is that I know for me in the back of my mind as I'm thinking about this long process, there's this question of possibility of condemnation. I would really like us to be able to move forward in this process, however long and challenging and fraught it may be, so that we can get to a conclusion that works for everybody. And I would really hate to see a situation happen where that process gets cut short. And so I'm sure that you can't give me any assurances one way or the other, but to the extent that you could speak to the possibility or likelihood of that happening, I would appreciate it. So,
Actually, can I just address that first? We want what you want. We don't want to see this process go to there. We everything that we stand for is working with the board, working with the community, working with the state as we continue to go forward.
I would like to add, though, that what's critical is that we have to have two parties that are interested in working together on this, and that is my biggest concern right now. And so I think that having a dialogue about what is acceptable, yes, this is a first step in this process, but it's not going to stop the process. So I think that it's very important that we understand as well that we are going to be able to work with the board going forward and having meaningful dialogue about what this is going to look like. And that does remain a concern. So if I could just...
I guess I
go
have
ahead,
some follow-up. And this may be...
Let me just make sure, Amy, have you concluded?
had hoped Alice could maybe elaborate on some of those, but if, Vernon, if you want, you have something. Yeah.
I'm more concerned at this point, based upon your suggestion that the parties, that the Army might well want to take action that would be consistent with what the board would want, and the board having duties, you know, across the board, both to the Hawaiian community, the regular community, and the state overall. I'm more concerned about procedures, and then maybe the AG office. I think that hearings of this nature that we've had the last few times is good because it brings out the flavor of where people are coming from. But you've gotten a lot of that, and you've got 4 volumes now of testimony and so forth, so you know where it's coming out. We didn't prior to this time. On the other hand, I'm also aware that hearings like today are an opportunity for misinformation and for effort just to enrage or do things that would be contrary for the board, the state, and for the Army. So, if you have any suggestions on how we might be able to get around this, for instance, and I'm not sure whether it's the staff or the Army, if the for real is giving up Mākua and Moho and one portion of
the Pupukea parcel, yeah.
Then is it necessary for us to go back and do archaeological stuff on property that you're currently using, but you have no intention to continue after 2029, so that rather than looking for bones, you could look for it just in the Kahuku area, if that's what ends up to be, rather than spending all of this time and efforts to inflame the situation more.
So if I may speak to the cultural, because that focus was a focus of the land board submittal, the land division submittal, and many of the public comments today. And as I was trying to say earlier, all of the Makai parcel at Kahuku training area has been surveyed at industry standard. All of the Mākua state-owned land has been surveyed at industry standard, all of it. And while your SHPD does not have guidelines to guide archaeological inventory survey, we do have an agreement within our PA that SHPD has agreed to, and that is to that standard. It's also a standard that's used in many other states and in private industry is recognized. So those are complete. Poamoho is not. But honestly, if you've seen that parcel, it is a steeply sloping, impenetrable jungle. It is not passable. Some of your land division staff were out there for inspections, and they can verify that. To try to go in there and do archaeological survey when the Army's not even using it for ground training at all, nor has it, just seems to be a really unnecessary burden at this point. And we think it's also just, from an archaeological perspective, has very low probability for success there. So I would just suggest that there is due diligence on.
Perhaps my follow-up question is to the staff, that if what we're talking about is just that one Kahuku, whether it's necessary to go through and do all of the DAR and the shifting and stuff, if there's no requirement to, or request even by the Army to get a lease on that area.
Vernon, would you indulge me? Maybe let them, could you finish the description of your responses? Because I feel like that would be helpful for me to have in the back of my mind as staff is, or as the board is asking staff.
I've gone through much detail, and I won't read through all of that, but as I noted, that the majority of those lands have been surveyed. Now, within the Pupukea, the Mākua parcel, tract A3, the steeply sloping areas have not been surveyed, and that is also normal under archaeological inventory standards. There's very low likelihood of anything being found in that kind of an environment. I would note that the burials that the commenters cited are not on the state-owned land. They are immediately southeast of the state-owned land. They are in essentially a former coral shelf. It's a rock shelter. They are not, they are protected. They have been consulted with SHPD. They have been consulted with the Burial Council, and so I just want to put the burial thing to rest with relation to those comments. But otherwise, the archaeological sites that have been found in KTA, the Makai parcel, are primarily limited to historic features. There is one traditional Hawaiian site that is there. I would like to speak to the biological resources. It's a little bit, I feel like there's something that's been lost in translation in what we submitted and what the understanding is. So under both HEPA and NEPA, the analysis is a combination of current historic data and also the updating of species lists. And so all of that was brought into this current EIS. I would like to stress that your DOFA gets annual reports that summarize all of the work that is going into all of these lands. So every year, and we have those available, they were linked in the website that support the document. Per one of the other commenters, we cannot put all of these documents in the EIS, or it would just be unreadable, and it's already a slog to get through. So those are supporting documents for people who are interested, but I would just stress that the natural resources folks are working day in, day out. They have 50 researchers from the University of Hawaii who support them. And all of this is documented in annual reports that are submitted to DLNR staff. And so that is what informed this EIS. There's not a piecemeal approach. It is how an EIS is set up. I've worked on over 10 EISs in my career, and to me, this totally meets the standard. With regard to the biological opinion and the PBA, again, those, when you conflate that we haven't done anything since 2008 because we haven't done a VO, it's because we haven't had a major training initiative or a military construction project initiated. That is when you would negotiate a new biological opinion with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. That is not the case nonetheless. The Army is currently working on a programmatic biological assessment that has just been transmitted to U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service this week. That will combine and consolidate the BOs for Oahu with the separate Mākua BOs. It will update the species, though I need to note that all species that are listed have ecosystem management, regardless of the BO. And there's only one species that is on state-owned land that is not part of the existing BOs. So again, the Natural Resources Program continues to not only do conservation efforts, over 9,000 acres of protected management units, but they also are working to control invasive species such as the devilweed, such as the CRB, and they do that in partnership with outside organizations to include DLNR. And that's how the Natural Resources Program effort works. And all of these documents are interim. Everything is done in coordination with the DLNR. And then with regard to the baseline, I just want to be very clear that the baseline for the EIS included past, present, and future considerations for each action alternative and the no action alternative. The existing conditions are set up adequately to form a baseline within which to analyze those impacts. That is, again, an industry standard, and I feel that that has been adequately addressed. I do want to speak to this. So there was the note about the seaworm letter. We read that as more of this is an ongoing concern at military installations, not that we have fallen afoul of something with seaworm. But I do want to note that for testing of Mākua in the EIS, the monitoring program went from 2009 to 2021 to investigate potential offsite migration from MMR training areas to the Mulebai. From 2020 to 2021, there was another monitoring event, and apart from manganese in one well, no other analytes detected in the groundwater exceed US EPA's standard for tap water. Nickel, copper, and Mākua stream were detected at concentrations exceeding freshwater standards. These metals, though, are naturally found and present in background concentrations in Hawaii. So that is also included in the EIS, but I just wanted to let you know that is ongoing. And as we move forward, there will have to be additional testing that is done as part of the cleanup process to ensure that munitions constituents are not contributing to any groundwater contamination. Does that make sense?
Yep, that's really helpful. Thank you.
I think I covered the cleanup and release compliance actions. Oh, and regarding the conservation districts and our lack of the OCCL comment, the KTA parcel, the Makai parcel is not conservation, that's an agricultural zone.
Thank you, appreciate it. And, just to your point earlier, Alice, I hope, we've interacted now for about a year. Appreciate all of your work on this. I hope you take these questions as an indication that the board is interested in working with you. So,
of course.
you know, I just wanted to make that clear. And then thank you, Brian, for letting me interrupt so we get back to
That's very helpful.
your question.
Well, because this is my last, maybe my last meeting, that I'm really anxious to see whether there can't be less red tape, more reports, 4 more volumes, but coming to an agreement that's understandable, transparent, and would be welcomed by the Hawaiian community.
Well, we just want our land back.
Anyhow, so to the staff, I guess, to the extent that if the issue is only that one Kahuku parcel, is there an adequacy of the report to this point? And in particular, I think what Mike Kane told me was that one Kahuku parcel is ag, that we don't have the conservation, so the automatic conflict between our conservation rules and military training. But is there an adequacy of the report if it were just scoped onto that one area?
This particular document versus.
Make sure that the people can hear.
Okay, I just want to verify. Are you talking about the document that's in front of us today? Or
yes,
okay,
yes.
So my answer to that is unfortunately no. We could not just use this and say it's good. Yeah. Unfortunately, the proposed action that is within here is for the retention of all the lands. That is what's in there. We cannot. Yeah, we cannot. We cannot separate. They would have to do a new document with only focus on that particular alternative as their preferred.
Would that be an alternative? Rather than having to go check for bones in 6,000 acres, if the request was really only for real, for that 400 acres in Kahuku 1, you know, is there enough data that you can glean from already what's submitted, or would you need more data?
Okay. As somebody who, this is pretty much my career, is reviewing these environmental assessment documents and these environmental impact statements. I base my education, my bachelor's on this, I base my master's on this. I've been working and planning for over, I think, 15 years at this point. This EIS does not, regardless of what Alice has said is industry standard, this EIS is not what we are used to seeing, at least from a HEPA standpoint. I'm going to be very honest. Normally when we are talking about a particular project with a particular area, we see updated biological surveys done by a biologist, purposefully done for the project, as well as at least an archaeological literature review and field survey, which may or may not lead to an AIS. That is up to SHPE. We don't make that call. We see actual data, actual bio surveys, and they are included in the EIS. The full survey is appendicized so that all our different divisions have the data they need to say, okay, this sounds reasonable, this sounds great, this is missing, we need to fit, we need more information about this. Unfortunately, what we're seeing in this particular document is not those things. And so for that reason, I would ask that it meets what we consider to be HEPA standard. That would be my request. If we're going to move forward with that idea, we could, but it needs to meet HEPA standards, at least for us.
And if I could just add on, specifically in response to Vernon's question. It's my understanding, as far as what we're required to review under Chapter 343, it is all of the alternatives that have been presented in the document. So while their preferred alternative may be, we're going to scale back, we're only going to use this particular land, we nonetheless are required by law to look at all of the alternatives, because we don't know which alternative they may choose to do. So that's why I think the EIS, and I greatly appreciate the scaled back. I mean, I think the Army has demonstrated that they have heard the community. The fact that they are scaling back and choosing to decrease their footprint, that I think demonstrates this goodwill in trying to work. But that's not the standard that we have to apply when we're reviewing the EIS. We have to look at every single alternative that they have identified in their document, because we don't know what will be the preferred alternative at the end. So, I mean, I think that we are still nonetheless required to do a comprehensive review of the EIS and all of the alternatives. And I also want to comment that even if they use less land, it is still state land that's going to come back to us. So we still have to do an analysis to review what are the conditions of those lands that are coming back to us, whether they use them or whether they return them.
Yeah.
So that's my
Yeah, that was going to be sort of my follow-up question, Chair. I mean, you would think about this on a much smaller scale, but if this was a warehouse that somebody had a lease on, we would expect them to do a comprehensive analysis to at least understand what's there, to the community's points about remediation and so.
May I add one thing though in this, is that I get what the staff is saying about what they're used to for HEPA, but under the new HEPA rules, a NEPA document can be submitted. In fact, a NEPA document can just focus on the preferred alternative when it goes to the final. We have included all the analysis for all of the alternatives, and again, we stand by that analysis. I believe that that we have met the standard to provide that. Now, I understand that for the asking for a new archaeological inventory survey, that is not required if we have already done adequate inventory survey of those lands.
So we may disagree, Alice, because I think we look at Chapter 6C, the requirements of Chapter 6C, and we look at HEPA standards, perhaps a little different than NEPA standards. So you may actually proceed under NEPA with a very different outcome than we're reviewing under HEPA. But I think we look at, with respect to SHPD, they're looking at what's the requirements under Chapter 6C when they're looking at the HEPA standards. So I think that was going to be a question I had for you. You talked about industry standard. What is the industry standard for purposes of an archaeological, cultural and historic reviews in your mind?
Well, generally in how we've conducted survey in Hawaii for ages, and that seems to have worked, is that it's set up on a 15-meter interval transect, and those transects are walked back and forth. There are certain degrees of slope. If it's over 30 degrees slope, it is not required. You could spread your intervals out to a broader standard or go from the ridge or the valley floor. That is normal.
But I think that's a distinction between, in Hawaii, we're looking at the geographic area. I will tell you, Waimea Valley, we have found burial caves in the steepest slopes.
Yes.
So the archaeological review is not based upon just industry standards. We are looking at the specific geographic area, talking to people from that area, Kupuna, what does the Mo'olelo have of this area? And I think, so that's a distinction between, in my view, between your view of an industry standard versus the specific requirements under Chapter 60.
Well, we have to go with an industry standard because SHPD does not have archaeological inventory survey standards established for the state.
I think I disagree with that. I think Chapter 60 and their administrative rules, I mean, we are requiring everybody down Kaka'apu, fully developed. You got to do an archaeological inventory survey on land that's already been, what could have been viewed, and we have found burials. So I think there are specific rules under SHPD on how you do an archaeological inventory survey, and it is very site specific.
Agreed. Yeah, so before we go in and do an archaeological survey, we assess the geology, we assess prior identification, other studies, we do all of that. We look at the geology, and that's standard here for how the Cultural Resources Program in Hawaii works.
And I think that's, so what, as I read the SHPD comments, exactly what you said is their expectation of the kinds of information they needed to determine whether an archaeological inventory survey was required to identify, even under section 106 and under chapter 6C, identification of historic and cultural resources. Unless we know what's on there, how can we complete the analysis? Even for kapa'akai, identification of the natural and cultural resources, potential impacts of the project to those resources, and then reasonable mitigation. I think what I heard from SHPD was they couldn't even complete step 1 because there was not all of the baseline data for them to evaluate what additional information needed to be had to determine the identification of cultural and natural resources. We may disagree.
Well, I would just say that all of what you just described is in the EIS and the literature review that is an appendix to the EIS, and also all of the research that was done to support the CIA would also inform the kapa'akai analysis.
And I suspect, so I think what we have is probably the same set of facts, a different interpretation of how those facts apply to whatever the law may be.
Sure.
Yes.
Okay, so we're talking about standards. You have a set of standards. You have a set of standards. The law says something else. So where is it in between that we can actually say what is required? I mean, right now, the laws have changed since the land was first leased to you guys 65 years ago. And everybody else has to comply to updated standards. I don't know if the military has updated their standards to meet whatever standards are current in our laws right now.
I'm not trying with the existing HEPA rules that were updated in 2019 to include the NEPA. We have been following that all along, and our attorneys have been reviewing that along with it.
I think our interpretation, and I think this is where I agree with Dawn. I think we have a set of facts and how we view HEPA and how I've been through HEPA numerous times. I did the EMI EIS. I'm pretty confident in what I'm advising to the board today. That I'll just leave it at that.
Lauren, can I just, sorry,
No, please.
question, and I was remiss in not saying earlier, just thank you guys for really excellent staff work. I think some of the public comments reflected this, but yeah, this is really good work. So thank you guys for doing such a thorough job and being so conscientious with this. It's obviously a really important issue. So appreciate you putting us as board members in the best possible position coming into the meeting. You know, we had an opportunity to hear from the Army about some of their responses to some of the issues that were laid out in the staff submittal. I would be curious if you had any responses to that, and I would also be curious. So, as you know, when we considered the Papakuloa FEIS, there were a number of areas that we requested in that decision that the Army considered in the non-acceptance, and I'm wondering if you were to put together a list in your mind, what are the list of issues that in a very concise way you could present that you feel are deficient and need to be addressed?
Okay, what was part one? I got the last part. What was part one again?
Part one was you did a great job.
No, you had a question
Part
though.
two was if you had any, we heard from Alice some of the responses that they had to the concerns that were raised in the staff submittal and recommendations. So I was wondering if you had any rebuttals to those responses.
Okay,
yeah,
so
that was my second.
So yes, I do have some rebuttal responses to that. You know, when we talk about the biological resources, and while, you know, they may send over these yearly annual reports to DOFA, the fact of the matter is that information and that data for DOFA to review as a whole, right, for the larger picture. And not just DOFA, it's for the public, it's for other biologists that may be out there that are interested. That is supposed to be in the document. If I am a biologist from UH and I am interested in this and I pick that up, can I get the same information that DOFA gets on an annual basis? I should be able to pick up what are the endangered species, what is their take, if there's take, what are those take limits? What are the mitigation measures ongoing? Those should all be spelled out very clearly in there. I think DOFA made it really clear, like they want to know what the threshold is, right? To see if mitigation is even working. I don't, you know, they didn't find it in there. I didn't find it in there. So I have a bit of an issue saying that, oh, because DOFA gets them, therefore it's okay. It's kind of like the SHPT. So SHPT signed off on the programmatic agreement. My understanding from SHPT by reading their comments was that even though the PA exists, they've been asking in their comments to the Army on these documents for updates on where they are in that programmatic agreement. That's telling me, you know, they're telling me they haven't seen anything since, I don't know what date, but they provided a date. Like we haven't seen any updated surveys since X date. So where is that information? That's also part of the baseline information, which I feel like we need to provide to you folks so that we can do a proper analysis and have you guys make a decision based on sound data. So I'm not really understanding, I guess, their point of view on that. Regarding the cultural surveys, so CIAs do not have necessarily what we call rules or standards setting forth what's supposed to be included in the CIA. It's very subjective to the reviewer on whether or not they feel that the CIA is satisfactory or acceptable or, you know, divulges enough information. So because we are lucky enough to have Moku as our, you know, kind of our partner in this, what I like to do is I like to take the CIA and go and consult with Moku, Lemana, and she'll put me in touch with whoever I need to, or she'll talk to whoever she needs to. And we'll verify, did they contact the right people? Did they not? So when I make comments like, oh, Moku was not consulted, or, you know, there's missing people from the relevant Moku, I have confirmed it with Lemana. Because I want to make sure she's going to know who the lineal descendants are. I don't. But if she's telling me it's not in there, I think it's our responsibility to share that and to hopefully try and close the hole. We're providing it as a commentary, but they have chosen not to. After our urgence to please consult, not just meet, we ask them to consult. There's a very big difference between consulting and just holding a meeting. So
can you just, I think this was something that is important that came up in the last meeting, and maybe not everybody understands the difference between a meeting and a consultation. Could you just say 30 seconds?
Okay, so meeting is basically you sit around, they present to you something, you ask questions, pow. Okay, consultation is having meaningful discussion. This is the area, okay, what do you know about this area? What do you have mo'olelo? Do you have any anything to share about it? Do you know lineal descendants from that we can get in touch with, that we can, you know, talk story with, share more stories, right? All those cultural and archaeological and all those significant factors come out in what we call these talk story sessions or consultation with our Kona and lineal descendants. They are very important for the EIS because without those stories, we don't know what's there. We're still left with the unknown. And so we cannot make those calls that say, oh, no impact, because we don't know, we didn't do our consultation properly. So.
Sure. Quick question. So, thank you. What are your comeback? What's your comeback towards Lauren's explanation right now?
Well, I just want to make it very clear that the Army has groups of consulting parties for each installation. So I think we currently consult with over 45,
80.
Well, for these areas,
for these specific areas, yeah.
Yeah. consulting parties, and I brought the list of people who were interviewed or requested for interview for the CIA that includes some very well-respected community members. I acknowledge that we have not gone as far as we probably should with Ahupua, but we did initiate meetings, just a meeting with them last summer and again in October, and then last week they held another meeting on the Big Island where Leimana attended with some of our staff. So I would just suggest that we spoke with, very well-respected kupuna, and I will acknowledge they are anti-military too, but they did provide information that was important to inform the cultural impact assessment. And so again, and the CIA includes multiple mo'olelo that for each of these areas, I acknowledge that Shifty identified some that were not included, but there are many that are included, as well as place names and other research. So I would just urge people to just actually look at the document and see what kind of information in the NAPO was shared from those.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, if I could just push back a little bit gently on that. I mean, you certainly, with your experience working on these kinds of documents, know the difference between a meeting and a consultation.
Honestly, I look at consultation under like the Section 106 terms in NAGPRA. That's the basis of my professional experience. And yes, I know what that consultation looks like. And so, as I said, I acknowledge that we had meetings with Leimana, Ahupua, and that's all we've had. But we've agreed, the Ahupua Council and the Army, to continue to collaboratively work forward. And I hope that is fruitful.
Yeah,
and I think further also, what Alice was saying was we have conducted consultation with others. These were not mere meetings. There has been that level of consultation with many others.
Just not with the Ahupua Council.
And I was glad to hear Leimana mention that she and Ahupua were keen to continue the conversation with you all as well. I just would again, I think, gently push back, knowing that Ahupua exists essentially for the express purpose of facilitating information exchange between the Native Hawaiian community and the land board in general, in particular, especially being part of the land board. It really feels like a missed opportunity not to engage with them very early on in a more formal capacity. I think everybody acknowledges that that's a missed opportunity, so I'm glad to hear that you guys have been talking and are planning to rectify that going forward. But I do, it's concerning to me that this is the second meeting that we're at where it sounds like Ahupua was not consulted in a way that shows respect for the organization and the role that it plays.
It's somewhat awkward for us because some of our consulting parties take issue with, and that's been a real hard place to be.
I'm sure they do, and welcome to working in Hawaii.
Well,
it's going to be an issue that we all have to work with.
This is my first experience working directly with the Ahupua, so thank you. Acknowledged.
Another question? Lauren, this is for you. So, do you feel that consultation requires agreement? Or does it just require talking with each other?
I don't think consultation means agreement. I don't think so. I think what consultation means is that the issues are brought to the table, but more so for the CIA, those cultural issues are brought to the table so that they're at least identified. Whether or not that they can come to a conclusion on mitigation, that might not be right away, but at least if we have identified it, we can address it. But if we don't know it, we can't do anything. I can't make any recommendations to the board, nor can Shifty or any other, or Ahupua cannot make any recommendations on how to potentially mitigate.
I had one other question. So, Kaipo had talked about what he does up at Wakalo training area. And I've been up in there a number of tours on involvement with archaeologists, biologists, a whole lot of experts. When I worked at Parker Ranch, we would go out into the field in Keamuku before that acquisition, and there would be one military person and 5 or 6 other consultants checking on a number of things. And I'm unfamiliar with what is occurring on the sites on Oahu. Can somebody comment on what you do as far as resource management, archaeological sites?
Yeah, so let's use Kahuku Makai parcel for the example. So the area's been surveyed for archaeological sites, so sites are monitored on a periodic basis. Also training that goes on, there's the staff go out and examine the range after the training has occurred to ensure that there were no issues that arose or any effects to any resources as part of that. Again, the natural resources teams work throughout all the installations, and again, they're managing 89 threatened and endangered species. So they have a lot of work. They manage habitat management units at each of the installations, and again, the invasive species control work that they do.
All right, thank you very much.
Did she say 89 different species?
Yes. Threatened and endangered.
Threatened and endangered. And Kahuku alone?
No. On Oahu, the 89 threatened and endangered species that are found on Army property and that are active conservation measures for a portion of those.
That includes the federally owned lands, so across Schofield, Wheeler, Shafter.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? I'm going to ask a few. I'd like to first start off with, this is not easy. This, it is a balancing, for me, it is a balancing the long-term land disposition for the military. My father, he was in the National Guard and got activated and was sent to Vietnam. So I know, but this is not my father's generation. I know that for sure. But I've also seen the role that, in particular, PTA has provided for training. I mean, I think the goal of national security is that you never have to go to war, that you are trained to prevent that move. But you want to make sure that if you have to, that these personnel are well equipped and they're trained. So, but for me, I guess the difficulty I have with where we are today is we are not asking the question of whether the Army's presence is good or bad, whether training is good or bad, whether it's necessary or unnecessary. The only issue before the board, and I think that's part of the country, is the adequacy of the EIS, of the final EIS. That's the only issue before us. And I also do want to caveat too, this is nothing to preclude other discussions on land retention, but this is the only matter before the board. It is the adequacy of the EIS. And I think our staff, and quite frankly, all of our divisions, looked at the EIS in the context of Chapter 60 and the administrative rules and their own administrative rules, whether it's DOFA, whether it was DAR, whether it was Conservation District, whether it was C1. So that is the lens upon which we looked at, our staff looked at in reviewing the EIS. I also think that there is a fundamental, perhaps, I found to be a little challenging, maybe not the right word, but I think the Army's discussion about what is the proposed action is a real estate transaction. And I guess I would disagree with that. The proposed action is a continued use of state lands for training. When I think about a real estate transaction, I think about a subdivision approval. We're going to change ownership of land. It is not dealing with use. So I think I had a little disagreement in just the description of the proposed action, as I see it more than just a real estate transaction. So, you know, so in that view, when I looked at the EIS, I looked at it through the lens of what is your use? And yes, this is a continuing of an existing use, but nonetheless, we are required to look at what are you proposing to do on these lands, even if you're not proposing to change anything, even if it is continued use. But at the same time, that does mean that BLNR, we have to look at, we have all of these, and it is articulated both in our rules as well as the law. What are the resources we need to assess? And for the land board, I understand we are required to make an informed decision. So how do we have all of the information to make an informed decision? In reviewing the EIS, I guess I was disappointed, and I wish I was disappointed, that in the draft EIS, we raised a lot of comments that we felt were not addressed in the final EIS. And I think that was a real missed opportunity. So the three standards upon which we have to evaluate the EIS, and the burden is on the applicant, it is on the Army to provide us sufficient information. But the three standards is procedurally, did you meet all the procedural requirements? I think you did. Did you meet the content requirements based upon our review, based upon the standards that we look at, the law, under whether it's Chapter 60 or DOFA or any of our other divisions? For all of the reasons I think identified in both the staff submittal, and I greatly appreciated, quite frankly, the Army's response to the submittal, as that clearly articulated for me, one, a somewhat of a consensus that the things that we felt were shortcoming, like the biological opinions, you agreed that they had not been done, or that you were relying upon that. So again, it's a bit, we may have, I think we're not necessarily disagreeing with the facts. The facts are you provided, your reliance on the biological opinions were 2003, 2019, for 1999, 2004, 2007, 2008 for Mākua, and 2003 for all of the other training areas. So let me just finish. So for me, laws have changed. Status of endangered species have changed. The way that DOFA looks at things have, and their responsibilities have changed. And the fact that you are doing an updated biological opinion that will be completed at the end of 2025. It would have been much more helpful if it was done prior to the final EIS coming to us. Because that to me acknowledges, and I guess in my view, perhaps not in the Army's view, but there is a gap. Similarly, even the cultural resources, we generally don't rely upon just a cultural resources literature review. We do look at field reports. We do look at SHPD will determine whether based upon the literature review, there's any additional testing that needs to be done. And the way, and I read SHPD's comments to say that there was insufficient information to make that determination. Similarly, I think the cultural impact assessment, again, all of this should lead us to the identification, ultimately when we have to do the Kapa'akai analysis. Has there been an identification of all of the resources? Has there been what impact does the proposed project have to the resources? The proposed project is not a real estate transaction. It is a continued operation, use of the state lands for military purposes. So that's the way that upon which, at least that I looked at this. In order for the board to make a determination on the Kapa'akai, what are reasonable mitigation measures? For too long, I think we, from a cultural standpoint, we have always looked at mitigation rather than avoidance. And I think having the information, all of that information about the identification of resources, puts us in a much better position to avoid impact rather than looking at mitigation. Water resources. Similarly, Dar had made a comment that, I guess it was, I think it was about streams and, what was their specific comment? And I think the Army's, the Army's response is that there really are no streams. There's intermittent and ephemeral streams that are present. Those resources are as important as just permanent streams. And I think we would have wanted at least some monitoring of that to determine what is the aquatic like, if anything, inside here. So I think acknowledging that, or recognizing that there are these types of streams present without doing any additional fact gathering, in my view, just confirms that there was not sufficient information. And I think the Conservation District, while I acknowledge that Kahuku is not, it's ag zone lands. The other two sites include conservation lands.
Yeah.
So those, and I think even the Army acknowledges that a rule amendment, I think you say, difficulties to obtaining a rule amendment to allow military activities on conservation lands. It is going to be difficult, but difficult doesn't mean that you just dismiss it. And I don't think that there's been, in my view, a good faith effort to move us in that direction. Now, the EIS is critical to getting to that point, but I think just saying that it's administrative difficulties, I think that just diminishes the importance of OCCL's comments. So, and my last point is, and I will share, I too am disappointed, I think it was Alice, your comment. When Member Barnes asked the question about, can we avoid sort of condemnation? And your comment was, we have to have two parties willing to work together. And the implication I got was that we're not willing to work with the Army.
I'm not saying that at all, ma'am. I'm just saying that I see that as a necessary condition for us to move forward in good faith effort.
Yeah.
This has been a very difficult EIS process. Yes. We have been very accommodating, and I believe that our document meets the HEPA standard.
Okay. No, and I appreciate your comment on that. But I think, again, I look at the three criteria: procedural, content, and comments. The department in particular made comments to the draft EIS that, in my view, were not adequately addressed in the final EIS. And so, while I understand that the Army and the state, in particular BLNR, may have a different understanding of the rules or the laws that may be applicable, in the context of this, it does make a difference how we view the rules and the law, because it's those standards upon which we will evaluate this. So I do take a little issue that we're not willing, or that we have to have two parties that are willing to work together. I think I would have appreciated having some acknowledgement in the document that there were shortcomings. There seems to be, because even your comment, which I think I like the staff, took a little issue that it was about talking to Kupuna and
said it was awkward, I believe the word was. Consulting with
I can't remember.
Ahupua Council.
But it would be offensive, or is it?
The issue was that the submittal said that we had not consulted with key community members. And when we've consulted with William Isla, Eric Anos, Alan Ho, Kyle Kajihiro, I could read them all out, but they all provided interviews. And so I just don't want that to be an insult to them, as they did provide their information for the CIA.
And you're right, they are very recognized community members, but I think in Hawaii, it's not so much who we talk to, it's who we don't talk to. And Ahamoku is by statute, and I'm not going to beat that horse again, because I think we've all made that point clear to you. But I don't think it was our intent to offend anybody by saying that they weren't consulted, or that those you consulted with don't have the same stature as Ahamoku. I recognize too, Ahamoku, they are not perfect. I've got many people in the community who say that Ahamoku doesn't represent their community. But by law, they do advise the board. And so we do reach out to Ahamoku and we listen to what they have to say. So again, the only action in my mind, at least for me, that is before this board is whether the EIS is adequate for the 3 Oahu sites. And that's the manner upon which I will review this. But thank you for listening to me. I appreciate the opportunity to have shared that with you.
Can I just add one thing, Chair? In regards to how you reviewed it as a continuing use, I would like to make a statement that that is the direction that staff, and in which that we've had meetings with the Army in regards to how this document was supposed to be geared towards. So that was what that was put out there very early on in regards to what the expectation was in terms of what the use was.
So, I mean, I recognize that we are both seeing things very differently, the Army, than from how we are, but I think for purposes of the decision today, it does make a difference how DLNR sees things.
Well, for the issue that you raised, the continued use of the land, we did incorporate all of that, and that is in all of the impacts analysis. It is included, all of the training, everything, and all of the NEPA that was done to support those training efforts is all provided in there, as are the annual reports. So I would just suggest that, yes, we did do that, and we have wrapped that in. It's been difficult for the land division to, I mean, they don't agree with that, and I guess we agree to disagree there.
But I think it was also the choice of words, that this is a real estate transaction. It sort of, in my mind, didn't accurately reflect what the proposed use is. It is not a real estate, in my view. And so again, we may differ because you said you had your legal counsel review it. So I think we may agree to disagree, but I think for purposes of today, it sort of makes a difference how we look at things.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for bringing up the real estate transaction point. That's something that I had intended to bring up in my comments and had forgotten to do. I know this is something that came up on our prior meeting on the PTA as well. I agree that characterizing this as a real estate transaction feels inaccurate at best and disingenuous at worst, and I just would encourage the Army to take that into consideration. I think, we've talked a lot about trust, broken trust. I think from a trust-based perspective, I think anybody who looks at this at a level beyond the very superficial would have to acknowledge that this is not simply a real estate transaction, and so I think we will have more trust with each other and be able to work together more collaboratively on this going forward if we can agree that that's not what this is.
Because I know you've done a lot of work, there's no doubt. 4 volumes. I know you've put together a lot. So I don't want to diminish that. But again, I think words make a difference. How we review it, how the public reviews it. And I think it does. So when you say, if 2 parties are willing to work together, I think all of that comes into that evaluation. So, okay. does any other, I think we're gonna take a break, or did you?
Well, I was gonna make a motion, but I had a question for Attorney General, which is that I would like to briefly go into executive session. So should I make the motion first and then make a motion to go into executive session, or make the executive session motion first?
Exec session first.
Thank you. Chair, I'd like to make a motion to go into an executive session pursuant to HRS 92-5A4 to consult with our attorney on legal matters pertaining to the board's powers, duties, privileges, immunities, and liabilities.
Okay, do I have a second?
Second.
Motion? Okay, a motion has been moved and seconded for the board to go into executive session. So you may all sit here, and we're gonna go in the back.
We gotta vote on it.
Oh. Can't leave. All in favor of going into executive session? Okay, vote is with 6. So we're gonna go into executive session, and we're gonna take a slight recess, but we will be right back.
Because of Mākua.
Just gonna use the restroom.
Met in executive session to confer with our Deputy Attorney General on our duties. So, we are back in open session. Thank you everybody for your patience. And do I have a motion so we can move into discussion?
Chair, yes, I would like to make a motion for discussion as recommended by staff. I would definitely be interested in any discussion that the board would like to have. From my perspective, and just in line with, and I think the first criteria that staff laid out for us was met. However, the second was not. I think we've had a lot of comments from the public, from the board, outlining the various ways that is the case. From my perspective, I think just the fundamental baseline of the data information, again, as staff reminded us, we need to have sufficient information to make a decision. Don't think that we met that standard. I have been taking notes and have a couple of ideas of areas that I would call out, but again, if there are other areas that other members of the board would welcome those in discussion. So we talked about the biological studies, both terrestrial and aquatic sources, so that would be my first point. My second point would be on the archaeological surveys, so that those don't cover the full sort of extent, as Lauren mentioned, of the area that is required to allow us to determine the impacts to historical and cultural resources. My third, which we talked about, would be related to Ahamoku and insufficiency of the consultation with Ahamoku and other key individuals. I'm sorry, there's a lot of points to keep track of. And then fourth would be essentially that then in turn does not provide enough information for us to conduct Kapakai analysis. Sixth would be the conservation, am I at 5? Oh, 5 would be the conservation district issue that was raised. 6 would be the groundwater issues. Sorry, 7 would be adequately considering staff, the use of state lands for forest reserves once current leases expire. And then 8 would be the issue of real estate transaction that would suggest that the third criteria was also not met, in that the comments provided by BLNR staff were not sufficiently addressed in the final document. Points made by lots of people, so that would be my motion.
Okay. Do I have a second? Second. Okay. Motion has been moved and seconded. We're in discussion. I think it is important we hear from everybody. So, who do you want to?
Both sides, and while we appreciate everyone's testimony, I mean, testimonies from, I will not be supporting, you know. So that's my thought.
Okay. Thank you for your
comment and your comments. I likewise vote for the motions to not accept the report. I'm troubled, and I hope that for the future it can be worked out. Either reduce scope of property or some other resolution that will permit the Army to continue to provide some service to the state. But at this point, based on the vote, to accept the non-acceptance.
Thank you. I understand the concerns with shortcomings in the EIS. Okay. I also appreciate the Army's willingness and preferred recommended alternative to return the 5,000 acres. The denial of the EIS will slow down the return of the 5,872 acres back to the state. So because of that, and because I want the show of good faith by the Army to move forward, I'm going to be voting against this motion. Just want to let you know my reasons.
And most importantly, to everyone in this room and everyone that submitted testimony. That was a lot of reading that we have to and wake up and read again. But thank you. It's not an easy decision to make, but I'm going to be supporting.
Riley, you know I love and respect you, and I wholeheartedly agree with a lot of what you said, and I also hope that this doesn't get in the way of moving in a positive direction, and along the lines of the conversation that we had earlier. This is the first step. I hope that we can continue to work cooperatively together. Questions and yeah. Thank you.
Sure. Can I just say I love you too, brother?
Paul's always, bless her heart, she's always just the most compassionate person you've ever seen. I just want to make a comment that I think the Army, I think they've heard a lot of the community's concerns. I do not in any way want to diminish that, because I think there has been efforts to meet. I think that they have the fact that they've talked about cutting back their footprint. I think it is very rare that DOD ever look at taking land, giving land back that they've occupied. And we've heard stories and stories over and over again. But again, I think this is recognizing times have changed. I think we have seen the power of the community those of you who have showed up here as well as in our last meeting, that your voices are, that it is not always just black and white, one way or the other. That there is, the military has been, I think there's a role for the military here. There is national security interests when you think about where we are strategically located. But that to me is not the issue before us today. Whether the Army has a continued presence, that's not the issue. And I do, how can we find a path forward? Can we work on something else? But again, I think that the only action before us is the acceptance or non-acceptance of the EIS. Did they meet the legal standards that's been articulated? One, I think we have to look at procedurally, have they complied? And I think the recommendation by staff is they have. Second criteria, the content requirements. Sufficient as there's a clear lack of baseline data for the board to make an informed decision that the impacts of the natural, historical, biological, and cultural resources have not been satisfied. And the third criteria is the comments during the review process. Have they been received satisfactorily to the accepting authority, and have they been incorporated in the final? When I'm reviewing on the draft EIS, were not satisfactorily addressed in the final EIS. Now, the Army may have a different view of what's the applicable laws, but based upon, and rarely does all of our divisions have comments that they make on EISs. But in this particular case, those divisions that did provide comments, the applicable laws, but there will be opportunities for us to explore how do we work together, how are there other means to continue to support each other, both because you have been a good partner with us in helping support, whether it's through the REPI program or other programs. But so I look forward to those opportunities to continue for us to work together. But at this time, yes. Go ahead.
No, I just was great gratitude for the staff submittal and recommendations, and if Karen will indulge me in maybe the staff submittal was also considered, and the contents in the staff submittal are considered in the decision around the.
Your points, your 8 points were sort of highlighting.
Yes, but there's more in there than the words that could come out.
So I think the staff submittal does stand on its own. I do want to, while the recommendation or the motion is to support staff's recommendation, I do want it to be very clear that this is the board's decision. At the end of the day, this is the board's decision independently, because I think all of us have reviewed today. And again, I too thank all of you for being here and being with us this whole time. I think we're still a little ahead of schedule than I had planned, which is mahalo to all of you for that.
Before we do the final vote, so that we're clear on this, we're making a motion to approve staff submittal.
Which was non-acceptance.
Which is non-acceptance of the EIS.
Or I guess the board is making the board has determined that the EIS is inadequate. Okay. The minutes are going to be very strange. Again, because this is so important, because this is not, your staff did a great job, undoubtedly. And I know Lauren has worked very hard. You worked for a long time with the Army and trying to shepherd all of our divisions to come up with comments. But this is the board's decision. Okay. So with that being said, I'm going to ask for a roll call vote. Rihanna?
Member Ono?
Aye.
Member Bard? Aye. Member Char?
Aye.
Chair Chang?
Aye.
Member Smith?
No.
Motion passes with 5 votes. Yeah, 4 votes. So the motion passes with 5 votes, and we had 1 that voted in opposition to the motion. So the motion passes. So again, thank you, everybody. We appreciate all of your This is, yeah, thank you for being here and for your participation. If there is no other business before the board, the meeting is adjourned. Stand. We do have to find a path forward.
Let's take a victory picture. Oh my gosh.
I always feel bad.
Well, I think probably Ian and Lauren deserve some.
Yeah, so I think
Seriously. No.